Welcome back to Pokemon Episode Summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 199, The Art of Pokemon. The episode begins with Ash and the gang arriving in the historic town of Whitestone after crossing a canyon to get there. Immediately upon entering the city, Ash and the gang are amazed by all of the buildings, which are clear white and appear to be made entirely of marble. But Brock's guidebook of the town confirms that this wasn't the case, and instead, the buildings were painted purely white, and after so many years, the layers have given the impression that they were made of marble, just because the paint had dried so well. Meanwhile, Team Rocket were also in Whitestone and were admiring the view of the white buildings. However, unlike Ash and the gang, they still thought that the buildings were in fact made of marble. Jessie was amazed by the marble and wanted to live in one of the buildings, imagining it as essentially like a huge marble palace where you got to eat royal food and take bubble baths. James, on the other hand, was not amazed by the marble whatsoever, as his mansion from when he was younger was made of marble, and he always thought that was pointless and a waste of money. So, he jokes that the marble was marvelous instead of marvelous, and Jessie and Meowth are so pissed off at this bad joke that they slap the shit out of him. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang, they were walking down the city streets, and suddenly, they spotted a wall, which was being painted by some Pokémon in blue, red, and green colors, one color per Pokémon, using their tails to do so. A woman was yelling at them angrily for painting the wall, so they then moved on to several other walls, causing several other people to start screaming them as well, until eventually, it seemed like the entire town was screaming at these Pokémon. Ash recognized these Pokémon as a species called Smeargle, one that Brock had told him about, and he confirms this by scanning the Smeargle with his Pokedex, which explains that Smeargle expressed themselves by painting with their tails, and it also adds that the color that they painted with depended on their mood. So, like, essentially, if they were angry, then they had the color red, if they were sad, there was the color blue, all that type of shit, you know? Anyways, the Smeargle were immensely frightened by all of the townspeople screaming at them, demanding them not to paint their white walls. So, the three Smeargle hid behind Ash and the gang. The townspeople then get out fucking brooms and mops and attempt to try and hurt the Smeargle, trying to get them from behind Ash, Brock, and Misty. But thankfully, Ash, Brock, and Misty tried their best to protect the Smeargle, believing that they obviously shouldn't be treated this way. I mean, the townspeople are just being fucking dicks to them. Who cares about your white walls, man? That doesn't mean you abuse Pokemon. All the townsfolk then begin to take out their anger on Ash and the gang, questioning why the fuck they were trying to defend the Smeargle, leading Ash and the gang to explain that no Pokemon should be treated this way. The townspeople did not agree, and the argument was about to grow out of control. Like, who fucking knows, maybe Ash and the gang were gonna get, like, pummeled by some brooms or some shit. But in a Deus Ex Machina moment, an old man, who was also a famous artist, appears. He tries his best to break up the argument, and claims that the three Smeargle were his, and tried to explain that the Smeargle didn't mean any harm by painting these buildings, stating that he believed that they were just artists like he was, and they wanted to find a way to express themselves. The townspeople did not care about this, though. They just wanted their fucking houses repaired and back to normal. So, the artist offered everyone in town a blank check from the First Johto Bank that would pay off every single bit of damage that the Smeargle had caused to their houses. Meanwhile, Team Rocket were watching this, and were planning to steal the Smeargle for themselves. Jessie also got excited by hearing the artist mention a bank check that he would put any money on that the townspeople desired, suggesting that all the townspeople should take advantage of this and ask for $1 million, even if they didn't need $1 million worth of repairs. But James, being the kind one, states that the man could be poor and may need that money, so the townspeople shouldn't scam him. Damn, James. Anyways, back with this artist, a reporter then came up to him and asked if his name was Jack Pollockson, which the old man confirmed. Yeah, I'd wager he wasn't very poor if he was famous enough to be recognized by a reporter. But anyways, upon learning that Jack Pollockson was actually Jack Pollockson, the reporter who initially came to town to do a report on Whitestone City in general and all of its buildings, decided to pivot his story to a story on Jack Pollockson, stating he would even do a whole documentary. The reporter's first question for Jack Pollockson was what he thought of the Smeargle's paintings on the wall. And Jack Pollockson and the reporter proceeded to talk about them while Brock looked in his guidebook, intrigued to learn more about Jack Pollockson after hearing who he was. He finds out in his guidebook that Jack Pollockson was indeed a famous artist, known for abstract paintings, and shows them a picture that is a massive hodgepodge of red, blue, and yellow colors. Brock notes that the painting looked like something that would be painted without actual paintbrushes due to how willy-nilly the strokes were, and came to the conclusion that the painting looked exactly like something the Smeargle would paint. So he theorized that maybe Jack Pollockson used the Smeargle for all of his paintings, pointing the similarities between the graffiti on the walls and the picture in the guidebook. Ash and Misty were not at all interested in this abstract art, just thinking it was ugly, but Brock rebutted that he just read in his guidebook that neither books nor TV could present the true power of his paintings, insinuating that the actual paintings looked better in person. It seems that Jack Pollockson himself had this idea as well, as when the reporter requested to go to Jack's painting studio to take some pictures of his paintings to put on his documentary, Jack declined, saying that people seeing a picture of his paintings wouldn't compare to seeing the paintings in person. The reporter decides to change his question, now asking if Jack could show how he makes his paintings at least, leading Jack to simply reveal that the three Smeargle were his paintbrushes, and they essentially worked with him on the paintings, confirming Brock's theory. With the reporter now seemingly done with his questioning, Jack then requested his Smeargle to come back to his studio with him. The Smeargle refused, shaking their heads as they proceed to go back to doing more graffiti yet again. They start going truly wild this time, as they paint everything they could find, not just the walls. They paint water fountains, cars, even people, painting them with red, blue, and yellow lines. Among these people were even Ash and the gang. Brock was painted with blue lines, Ash was painted with red lines, and Misty was painted with yellow lines. Togepi was also painted with yellow lines, and Pikachu had a red circle on its eye. Ash and Brock, and all the other townspeople for that matter, were extremely angry at getting painted, but Misty, on the other hand, actually kinda grew to like this, wanting to be a part of a potential famous piece of artwork from the Smeargle, even if she believed it was ugly. Jack Pollockson initially instructed all the townspeople to let the Smeargle do their thing over them, stating that they were going to make a work of art, but he eventually changed his mind when he realized that the Smeargle were merely painting lines and not even trying to do a painting, stating that they made a mess instead. So, when he changes his mind, he orders the Smeargle to stop painting and apologizes to all of the townsfolk, since everyone in the goddamn town was now covered in paint at this point. The townspeople angrily questioned Jack on why he thought that the Smeargle's graffiti was super messy and ugly, and not all of his paintings, stating that they were very similar, but Jack Pollockson corrects them, stating his belief that his paintings were a lot better, and adds that the Smeargle hadn't actually done any paintings for him in a long time. They had only been interested in graffiti, so therefore he thought that the Smeargle hadn't produced any work of quality in a very long time, stating that it was likely because the Smeargle hadn't gotten any inspiration for an actual good painting, and were instead just focusing on painting willy-nilly. The townspeople simply shrug this off and go to wash themselves off, only for Jack Pollockson to reveal that the paint was extremely hard to wash off, which caused everyone to fall over in annoyance, because now they had a long day of washing ahead of them. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they were still spying on everything going on, and had looked up Jack in a guidebook of their own, where they found out that the reason why Jack Pollockson was so famous was because he only showed off the good paintings that the Smeargle did, and didn't show any of their many failed attempts in the process. James, upon hearing that these paintings of Jack's could be valuable, at least some of them, decides that they should try and steal some of them, stating that they could potentially be as rare and valuable as some of the paintings at his family mansion, stating that there were paintings from Picasso, Rembrandt, and Monster Rodin. With that, Team Rocket decided to get up from the doorway that they were hiding by, and try their best to steal both Jack's paintings and his Smeargle. Meanwhile, back with Ash and the gang. The reporter now had another question for Jack, being how he was able to control the Smeargle to paint in the first place if they wouldn't listen to him right now. They wouldn't even come back to his studio. The old man simply reveals that he didn't know, and admits that he would try his best to think of a way to get the Smeargle fully under his control so that they wouldn't paint any more graffiti. The Smeargle were too hyper for Jack to be able to talk to them now, though, in an attempt to convince them to stop doing graffiti, so he simply just decided to physically drag them back to his studio. Also adding that any of the townsfolk could come along with him to his studio, where he would help them get washed off of all the paint, and also treat them to lunch. All of the townspeople denied this, not wanting to be in the same room as Smeargle if they didn't have to, but Ash and the gang were interested in Jack Pollockson's paintings anyways, and they wanted to get washed off, so they decided to accept Jack Pollockson's offer and headed over to his house. The reporter wanted to go as well, to film some stuff for his documentary inside Jack's house, but Jack denied his request, restating his belief that people seeing a painting through a picture or video wasn't as good as seeing a painting in person. The reporter concedes to Jack's wants and stays behind as Jack Pollockson thanks him for his cooperation and heads over to his studio with Ash and the gang and his Smeargle. After Jack Pollockson lets Ash and the gang use his bathtub to wash up, Ash and the gang take the time to look around his studio, which happened to be a mansion, and notice that all of his walls in the studio were painted just like all of the walls in town. The same graffiti. Jack clarifies that he let the Smeargle paint wherever they want in his mansion, in case inspiration ever strike them at any point, explaining that the Smeargle painted based on their moods, so they could have a different mood at a certain time, and need to immediately paint something based on it. Jack then takes Ash and the gang to a room that was full of Smeargle's latest work, that they had actually managed to paint on paper. Jack then revealed that he turned Smeargle's graffiti into actual good paintings by turning them into collages. So essentially, he would rip up the different pieces of paper into small little parts and try and combine all of the Smeargle's strokes to actually make an interesting looking picture. Although he admits that he sometimes wondered if these collages counted as good paintings to begin with, since they were just collages. Misty then ignorantly questioned what made a painting good anyways, with Jack revealing the belief of most artists that what made a painting good was determined by what anyone looking at the painting could hear, see, or smell. Ash thought that Jack meant this literally, so he went up to smell some of the Smeargle's paintings and commented that all he smelled was paint. This led Jack to admit that he obviously wasn't explaining very well, and reiterated that what he meant by what a person could hear, see, or smell was based on the feeling that they got from the painting. So essentially, when you looked at a painting, it was determined good or not if people looking at it could smell, see, or hear certain things that the painting reminded them of. He then states that although anyone could sense whether a picture was good or not based on if they were able to think of anything because of it, he clarified that making a picture was an entirely different issue entirely, which required talent and work, adding that if his Smeargle really put their minds into a painting, then it would actually turn out very good. To prove this, he showed Ash and the gang several pictures in his private gallery, which he claimed to be his best ones, and showed them his #1 favorite painting, which everyone was enamored by, including Jack Pollockson himself, and the reporter and his cameraman, who had found their way into Jack's studio, despite agreeing that they wouldn't. with the reporter stating that he just couldn't help himself and he wanted to share Jack's paintings with the whole world. When Jack got mad at him, though, the TV reporter agreed to try his best to not film anything, due to the fear of Jack Pollockson threatening to arrest them for trespassing. Just then, Ash and the gang noticed that Wobbuffet had shown up as well, and came to the conclusion that Team Rocket must have been around. Sure enough, Ash and the gang then spotted Team Rocket hiding by a nearby painting, crying, apparently at its beauty. Although Jesse especially was really enamored by this painting, they still took the opportunity to do their motto when they saw Ash and the gang, stating their plan to steal these beautiful paintings. Ash and the gang were curious as to why Team Rocket were crying at a painting, not believing what they originally said, which was that they were just so enamored by the paintings that they began to cry since they were so beautiful. This leads Jessie to admit that she was crying because the painting reminded her of her past, where her very lonely childhood self would pick beautiful flowers, although stated that the flowers, nor this painting itself, were as beautiful as her. Essentially, the reason why Jessie wanted this painting in particular was because she wanted to always remember her past, because even if it made her sad, it also served as motivation to keep going in Team Rocket. However, Meowth then realized that if they stole valuable paintings, then the cops would immediately be after them, especially if they tried to sell the paintings after. Adding that they probably didn't realize this since they were so used to only stealing Pokemon, which usually didn't cause the cops to immediately come after them since the Pokemon weren't super valuable, or at least known to be valuable. So, Meowth suggests that they simply make their escape and leave the paintings behind, leading Jessie to angrily retort that she still wanted a way to remember the painting, which in turn led James to get the idea to take a picture of the painting with his camera, since that way Jessie could remember the painting, and they could sell the picture of the painting as opposed to worrying about stealing the real one and getting caught, stating that they could totally get away with selling a fake copy of a painting. Jessie and Meowth agree with this idea, so James takes a picture of the painting and runs off with Jessie and Meowth, escaping. Ash goes to chase after them, but Jack shouts to Team Rocket that their copies of the painting that they took pictures of would not be worth much at all in comparison to the original artwork. And because of this, he told Ash to not worry about going after Team Rocket, since the original painting was still safe, which was all that mattered. A few hours later, Team Rocket had returned to their Meowth balloon as nightfall approached, and were using a photocopier to photocopy the picture that James had took so that they could sell even more copies of it. Jessie was furious at this, as she told James that Jack had said that the copies would be worth far less than the original, and got mad that they just didn't take the original instead. James rebutted that there was no way that the copies would be worth any less, stating Andy Warhol as an example of a painting thief who made a lot of money from selling copies, and showed Jessie one of the copies to prove his point, only for Jessie to get even angrier as she realized that James had took a picture of the wrong picture, so it wasn't even the one that reminded her of her past. So she rips up the wrong painting in anger and declares that she would remember the painting in her heart. James questioned why Team Rocket couldn't just try and sneak back in to Jack's mansion and try and take a picture of the picture that Jessie wanted this time, leading Jessie to admit that it wasn't worth the risk, especially if the pictures of the painting that they took would be worth less. James suggested that they just steal the original picture, leading Meowth to remind him that the cops would come after them. Jessie then got the idea to simply steal the Smeargle like they were originally planning to do, and force the Smeargle to make original art for them against their will that Team Rocket could sell for money. Meanwhile, Ash and the gang were talking with Jack on his mansion's balcony, where Jack revealed his backstory, explaining that he used to want to be a Pokemon master like Ash, but once he saw the Smeargle and how he could utilize their ability to paint different colors based on their mood to his advantage, he came to the conclusion that he would have a more successful life trying to be an artist. Jack then states his worry that his career as an artist was officially over since he could no longer see the subtle differences in color like he used to be able to, which would therefore make his paintings less detailed and worse, since he wouldn't be able to see the subtle color differences in the Smeargle's paint in their tails, so he couldn't make collages that were as effective. He reveals the reasoning for not being able to see the subtle differences in color anymore being his old age, and remembers a time when he was younger when he could see all of the subtle colors, citing a morning 50 years ago where he saw a very beautiful sunrise that shined upon the lake, painting it 10,000 colors. He sadly looked at the lake now and could only see blue, much to his dismay, depressed that the most beautiful things he could see were now only limited to his memory. He was about to get depressed even more though, as suddenly Team Rocket showed up in their Meowth balloon and dropped a net down which captured the 3 Smeargle and dragged them back up to the balloon. Upon realizing that Team Rocket was responsible for this, Ash screams at Team Rocket, demanding that they give the Smeargle back, but Team Rocket obviously denied this and simply kept flying away in their balloon. Thankfully, one of the Smeargle got an idea though, as it managed to poke its yellow tail out of the net and began dripping down yellow paint onto the ground as the balloon continued, basically leaving a trail that Ash and the gang could follow so they wouldn't lose sight of the Meowth balloon. With Team Rocket not noticing this, they land the Meowth balloon and hand the Smeargle several canvases, pieces of paper, and other art supplies. And Meowth demands the Smeargle to paint new pictures for them, threatening that if they didn't, he would scratch them with his claws. Because of this, the Smeargle began hurriedly painting. While the Smeargle are doing this, Jessie realizes that she still had several scraps from the ripped-up painting from earlier, and decides to put them to use by combining the scraps to form a whole new painting, just like Jack did with his Smeargles. By the time Jessie was done doing this, the Smeargle had completed some paintings of their own, so Jessie began to put hers in a picture frame and combine the Smeargle's paintings in the same fashion before putting them in picture frames as well. Just then, though, Ash and the gang had successfully followed the Smeargle's trail of yellow paint and had arrived to confront Team Rocket, along with Jack Pollockson. This led Jessie to send out her Arbok to hold Ash and the gang back, leading Ash to send out his Pikachu to battle it. However, the sun then begins to rise, and Pollockson excitedly calls over his Smeargle to look at the view. So, the Smeargle simply stopped painting for Team Rocket since they were so attracted to the sunrise, and they were reunited with Pollockson just like that. With Smeargle back in his possession, Pollockson runs away, with Ash and the gang abandoning their battle with Team Rocket and following. Team Rocket were immensely confused by what the fuck just happened, and Meowth and James were furious that the Smeargle had escaped, but Jessie stated that it didn't matter at this point since the Smeargle had already painted some paintings for them, and now they had been combined, so now they just had to sell them. Meanwhile, the Smeargle were now painting the white buildings yet again. Jack was going to order the Smeargle to stop so that they wouldn't keep drawing more graffiti. However, he soon realized that his Smeargle were trying to paint over the graffiti and draw something actually good in replacement, wanting to fix their mistakes that had made the townspeople mad. Jack had his doubts about this, since the townspeople wanted all of the paint to go away, so their buildings could return to pure white. But Jack eventually realized that maybe if the Smeargle painted something good enough, the townspeople would appreciate it. So he suggested that the Smeargle paint the sunrise. Jack tells them how to do so, and the Smeargle begin painting, and eventually the artwork was complete, as all the townspeople opened their blinds for the morning and literally thought that the painting was an actual sunrise. Jack Pollockson explains that this was the Smeargle's way of making amends for the mess that they had made, and apologizes if the townspeople instead just wanted their walls to return to white. Thankfully for Smeargle and Jack, though, all of the townspeople thought that this sunrise painting was extremely beautiful, including the reporter and his cameraman, as the cameraman was trying to take a picture of the sunrise artwork with a high-definition camera. However, the reporter admitted that Jack was right, and that a picture, even one that was high-definition, couldn't compare to the real artwork in person. Jack then goes up to his Smeargle and happily hugs them, congratulating them on earning the townspeople's respect, when, unfortunately, it starts to rain, which washes away the sunrise picture. Ash and the gang showed up by this point to see the picture, although they only got to see it for like 5 seconds before it was washed off the wall, so this made them very depressed, as they wanted to see the Smeargle's work. So Ash suggested that Jack have his Smeargle make a new painting of the sunrise. Jack rebutted, though, that if he made a second painting of the sunrise, it would make the first one less special, and declares that he would instead make an entirely new painting, since the misfortune of the rain had given him and his Smeargle some more inspiration for a new picture. After viewing this new picture, Ash and the gang then say goodbye to Jack and his Smeargle and continue on their journey to Olivine City. The episode then ends with one last scene from Team Rocket, who were in their Meowth balloon still, as they hadn't been blasted off. Jessie was doing her best to combine all of the Smeargle's paintings into collages, only for Wobbuffet to forcibly pop out of its Pokeball and startle Jessie, which caused her to drop all of the canvases and papers out of the Meowth balloon, shattering them, meaning that Team Rocket no longer had any paintings that they could use. Sucks to be them.